describe, particularly how they write about their experiences with digital games in particular. And in it, I want to highlight an occult strain of metaphor in life writing about digital gameplay. Thinking about how authors have deployed a vocabulary of esoteric ritual and demonic possession to describe experiences of gaming, and to interrogate what players want and what they might want from gameplay. So in what follows, I'm going to read two accounts of what we might call demonic gameplay with and against research into eudaimonic gameplay, which DVRK, Meckler and Lindqvist have defined in terms of video game experiences that are profound, personally meaningful and transformative. There's a growing body of literature on eudaimonic play that's sort of emerging out of this intersection of social psychology and human-computer interaction. And these studies too are often grounded in what we might think of as forms of life writing, whether that's autoethnographic gameplay diaries or written survey and interview responses. But we should probably start with the etymology. Oh, here we go. Of the word demon, although I feel like this might be superfluous for at least some of us in the room. In some times and places, the term demon has referred to any supernatural being. In others, it's been used specifically to refer to evil supernatural beings. In Greek thought, demons occupy an ontological stratum somewhere between the fully divine and the merely human. They're sometimes seen as dictating the fates of individuals, families, or communities, and sometimes as manifesting something innate or essential about them. The Oxford English Dictionary lists indwelling spirit or genius and inner or attendant spirit associated with a person among its definitions. More recently, the figure of the demon has, of course, offered a way of discussing individuals' relationships with addictive substances or their mental health struggles, as in phrases like demon weed, demon drink, battling one's demons, and so on. And since the early-ish 19th century, we've also used the verb demonize to refer to instances where people or things or media are unjustly misrepresented as evil influences. So there's obviously quite a lot of ambiguity at play here. Is the demon foreign to us, or is it an expression of our very essence, something innate? Demons figure questions of agency and control, incarnating our fear that we might be all too susceptible to being manipulated or led astray, whether by malign exogenous forces or by our own endogenous appetites. Demons also situate humans within a more complex hierarchy or ecology of intelligent beings, asking us to consider what defines humanity, and for that matter, what it might mean to be more or less or other than human. And there are also obviously questions of morality in play too. Do demons have to be located on one side of a Manichaean good-evil binary, or are they simply other? And I'm setting up all this because I think these kinds of ambiguities and questions are at work in the text I'll be getting to a bit later. So that's demons. As for eudaimonia, here the OED gives conducive to happiness, the idea being, I guess, that you're under the sway of a kind of benign demon. But research on eudaimonic gameplay sits within a kind of broader area of media research that, as Cole and Gillies explain, tends to oppose hedonic engagements with media, which are motivated mostly by a desire for pleasure or fun or relaxation and escape, from eudaimonic ones, which are more meaning-seeking, supposedly, and entail a willingness to undergo emotional, ethical, or intellectual challenge in pursuit of deeper insights. At the same time, this term eudaimonic remains quite shifty and quite capacious. So Rowan Daniels and his co-authors observed that the term is often associated with appreciation, which is itself, they note, an imprecise term, but also with self-reflective experiences, social connectedness, nostalgia, well-being, elation, the desire for personal growth / self-realization, meaning / purpose / value, and authenticity / autonomy. And in an environment where video games in particular are still widely seen either as fundamentally trivial or as insidiously toxic, a lot of this eudaimonic gaming research is explicitly setting out to challenge prevailing opinions about games. It repeatedly insists that games can be more than stories with buttons, more serious, capable of evoking more complex experiences, a medium that might not be just worthy of being considered alongside literature or film or theatre, but might even be more emotionally engaging. And key to all of these claims and this rhetoric is this idea that games can enrich our understanding of the world beyond the game, and can become, to quote Cole and Gillies again, means of exploring ourselves, others, and aspects of the real world, furnishing what Daniels and his co-authors propose could be insights into the human condition, a term I dislike. So that's eudaimonic gameplay experience as it's kind of been described and theorized in the literature. But what do I mean when I'm talking about demonic gameplay experience? Here, my first text I'm going to turn to is by the clinical psychologist Alexander Chris, who in his book, The Gaming Mind, offers us a window on this kind of experience via his account of the corrosive nightly ritual, in his words, that his playthrough of From Software's Demon's Souls becomes. And this account comes from towards the end of the book, and it's a book that spends a lot of its length trying to counter stigmatizing stereotypes about games and gamers, and in fact to affirm gaming's therapeutic potential. So the book opens with an account of a staff meeting at which Chris, who is at this time a graduate student, is appalled to hear his senior colleagues glibly discussing the case of a young man they describe as a gamer kid, as if this appellation tells them everything they need to know about this individual. For Chris, these comments reflect what he calls a persistent stigma around games, a sense that they are at best a way to frivolously distract, at worst to corrupt and disfigure. He, by contrast, wants to believe that games can offer more, that term again, than immediate gratification, exploring complex aspects of the human experience. Which is not to say that Chris denies individuals can develop unhealthy relationships with games. His book is full of case studies that detail damagingly counterintuitive strategies for managing psychic distress through games. So he helps people to realize that they're kind of misrecognizing games and their potential to help them in the kind of loops they fall into. One of these stories, one of these case studies, centers on a high-flying graduate with a brilliant career ahead of him, overwhelmed by the sense that he can only fuck it up from here, in his term. Chris's patient finds perverse relief in what Chris describes as the hysterical dogma that games had the power to make him do things he didn't want to do. Basically, he stays up way too late playing Smash Brothers, and then he's bad at his job the next day. And this fulfills his sense that he is worthless and lazy. And for Chris, what he's doing here is willfully misrecognizing a compulsion that arose from within as a malevolent force that seized him from without. Games are simply too addictive for his frail willpower to resist. And by doing so, he's able to find an alibi for these self-sabotaging gaming binges and for affirming his sense of himself as weak and unworthy. So Chris's intervention in this case is to make him realize that games essentially have been unjustly demonized, that he has more agency than he might think. Towards the end of the game, towards the end of the book, however, Chris finds himself in a similar situation, slogging through Demon's Souls, a game that he describes as akin to a fate worse than death, Sisyphean labor, repeating itself endlessly with nothing learned, nothing gained, nothing to show for it. Nonetheless, he keeps coming back to the game, torturing himself with it, with a game I felt inept at, had begun to hate indeed. And he comes to the realization that the game has come to function as what he calls a repository for all my guilt and self-reproach. These feelings cluster around the fact that, having come to the end of his training and found a job elsewhere, Chris is going to have to stop working with Jack, the gamer kid who his colleagues had written off at the start of the book, and whose progression kind of provides the narrative spine of Chris's book. So Chris comes to understand his time with Demon Souls, which we probably don't need to be told is a game that can be very frustrating, difficult, etc., etc., as an unconscious attempt to absolve myself of the guilt of leaving Jack. So he's fallen into exactly the kind of disordered relationship with gameplay that he specializes in helping others to escape here. I think it's worth considering, though, that these kinds of experiences might not be as anomalous or as aberrant as Chris wants to believe. So Benjamin Nicol has recently argued that to truly understand gaming's popularity, we must account for the libidinal satisfaction that players unconsciously derive from what Nicol calls the failure to attain pleasure or mastery. We may not know that we crave these experiences of frustration and failure. We may not want to crave them, but for Nicol, one of the things games do is shed light on this occulted part of ourselves, a part that he believes is destined, even once we acknowledge its existence, to remain extimate, at once both intimate and uncannily exterior to the subject. And Nicol is working within a Lacanian framework as he's thinking through this. Michael Clune's 2015 memoir, Game Life, offers us a different framework, and another portrait of demonic play, one that confronts what Clune portrays as an even more profound otherness, not just a part of ourselves that's hard to acknowledge or recognize, but something really other. And the book documents Clune's relationship with 7 video games, mostly focusing on his childhood, charting a period that saw his Irish Catholic family migrating to the US, their move from the suburbs to a rural village, and the collapse of his parents' marriage. It was released in 2015, and it was preceded by Whiteout, a 2013 memoir of heroin addiction. And Clune occasionally mentions gaming in Whiteout, and he offers one fleeting flash forward partway through Game Life to an experience of an overdose. But for the most part, he kind of just leaves it hanging. He's published 2 memoirs, one about games, one about drugs, and readers are left to determine for themselves to what extent his relationship with the one resembles his relationship with the other, even as both books are very much concerned with the mechanics of habit and how Clune uses media and chemicals to attain a kind of different relationship to his body and to time. Also, from more of a cultural history perspective, Game Life is interesting for the way that it situates games like these, The Bard's Tale 2 and Ultima 3, within the kind of broader context of how computers and computer games were entering the home, but also of the broader context of the so-called satanic panic of the 1980s, this period where fears of devil-worshipping cabals conspiring to rend the fabric of society are spreading like wildfire in the US. And the chapter on The Bard's Tale mines quite a lot of comedy from Clune's mother's confiscation of the game, a game that she decides is evil after she sees a segment about Dungeons and Dragons on Oprah. He can't understand why these runes on the box are so alarming to his mum. Even at the time, Clune notes, people made fun of evangelical Christian groups who tried to ban D&D. Yet he ultimately implies that his mother is correct in intuiting that there's something evil about RPGs. This evil, however, has less to do with all of the runes and rites and grimoires and demons than it does the genre's attempt to translate reality into numbers. For Clune, numbers belong to an alien realm, a realm that he sees as far less hospitable to humans than that of words. He argues at one point, you don't have to be an evangelical Christian to know that there's such a thing as an evil truth and to know that it leaks constantly from the fantasy of numbers. And Clune basically develops this argument that by requiring us, human players, to accommodate ourselves to computational logic, computer games, and he's very big, and at the time I guess it made sense on this distinction between video games, twitchier reaction-based console TV games, and computer games, more simulation heavy. He says computer games foreground the inhumanity that lurks within each of us, and on which the human depends for its grip on the world. He figures this relationship in terms of the unfeeling bone that lurks beneath the surface of every human face and the ancient primitive mollusk suction and release of our orifices that gives our words breath and makes our thoughts go. So this unnerving reminder that a lot of these faculties we tend to see as quintessentially human, speech, thought, facial expression, are only possible thanks to these non-conscious autonomic processes that, in evolutionary terms, are a lot older than anything we could call humanity. So what to make of all this, other than, yeah, this sounds like a lapsed Catholic. In his account of game life, Francis Butterworth Parr wants to argue that the young Clune derives lessons from games that help him make sense of adult life, that there's something, at least according to some definitions of eudaimonia, like that going on here. By contrast, Ian Bogost holds that it's ultimately a book, Game Life that is, about the incompatibility rather than the affinity of game life and human life. For Bogost, Game Life affirms that the distinguishing feature of truly great games is their capacity to dominate us, subject us to pattern, take over our brains, separate humans from their humanity. Bogost goes on to argue, and I get the feeling he's sort of auditioning for book cover blurb status here, that by contrast, Clune's book will take over your brain in the opposite way, making you more human. So against the claims of eudaimonic gameplay researchers, for whom games are, as we saw, at least as capable of literature, if not more so, of catalyzing these kind of insights into what it means to be human, Bogost wants to cement literature's claims to be the true transmitter of these kinds of humanistic values, reflexivity, relationality, empathy, insight. But we might ask why insights into the human condition, which is quite a strange thing for a sometimes object-oriented ontologist like Bogost to prize, but I guess he's a contrarian. Why should this be the key metric for a medium's cultural value, this ability to tell us what it is to be human? Chris's failure to practice what he preaches with demon souls shows us the limits of models of human subjectivity predicated on ideals of sovereignty and agency. Clune's encounters with the sheer alterity of the computer force him to acknowledge that humanity is not the only game in town, and to question the normative force that invocations of the human, and the demonic, of course, often have. On Game Life's final pages, Clune observes that both the Bible and therapists tend to insist that the only thing that matters is the quality of our human relationships. But Clune is very insistent that there are other dimensions of life that matter. True, he says, the parts of our lives that aren't involved with people are less easy to fit into our stories and tend as such to be sidelined in works of autobiography. But this doesn't mean that our encounters with mountains, stars, or pixels, all of which he lists, should not be remembered or narrated somehow. And I guess my argument is this ultimately is the thing that the topos of the demon in gamer life writing might be doing, that it's kind of making our experiences with digital games easier to narrate. It's offering a way of figuring the allure of gaming while also acknowledging the threat it poses to familiar models of subjectivity and selfhood. I don't have time to discuss this game, but I want to sneak it in here. For Clune, this is all evil. Cassie McQuater's Black Room, really interesting game about sleeplessness and somnambulism in gameplay, which also centers on this identification with Lilith, this demonic figure from Jewish folklore, who's also a sort of feminist icon. So I think there's a gender dimension to all this too, but I'm going to park that contention and leave it there. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So